All right, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Again, welcome to everyone who's attending this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about some new functionality in Avail, which is an exciting thing. It's also can be a challenging thing when you're thinking about Avail as a content management solution, especially if you've been using the product for a long time. Adding a new feature into that workflow can sometimes, it's tough to wrap your head around, right? It's going to have to learn something new, implement something, roll it out to the team, test it out. So this webinar is going to touch on some of the how-tos of this new feature called organization palettes, but also kind of tie it into some real-world workflows, which I think is the most value that you can get is understanding how is this going to fit into the grand scheme of things? How is this going to add value to the solution, to our library, to our workflows, and just create some efficiency as well. So looking at the agenda for today, we're going to be touching on a couple of core concepts, core principles. If you've joined a webinar in the past, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm going to be talking about some important kind of understanding some key principles of Avail, some key terminology that we always like to touch on. And then I'm going to dive in and actually kind of demo organization palettes. I'm going to kind of give you an explanation around the why, and really kind of talking about how palettes, kind of the core feature palettes, really kind of evolved into this organization level feature. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, some understandings of kind of what that means, the differences between a personal palette and an organization palette, and then actually kind of show you how one is created, how a user or a publisher in this case would actually create an organization palette and share that with a team or group in Avail. I've also brought on some customers, right? So we've got Farnsworth Group and Hoefer Welker joining us today, and they're going to be telling their story. So both of these groups are kind of brand new to Avail. They started with Avail earlier this year and are kind of very early in their rollout process. But I asked them to join on really kind of specifically, kind of touching on that point I made at the intro is thinking about this new feature, how to implement this new feature. Both, Caitlin at Farnsworth and Reed at Hoefer Welker, they're looking at Avail and Organization Palettes is already kind of part of the product, right? They're seeing it from a perspective as a whole list of features, including Organization Palettes, and they've already kind of started to brainstorm and roll out some Organization Palettes to their team, really kind of around this kind of additive workflow around your templates, kind of a lean template strategy, and kind of leveraging organization palettes to kind of create this kind of workflow to make that a lot easier for their teams to bring things into their projects and start things up. So I've brought them on to tell their stories, to tell their strategies. How they've kind of organized Avail? It's another common question that we get from firms, new and old, is what are other people doing? How are they thinking about content management? How are they thinking about their channel structure? How are they implementing some of these new features? Which is this is kind of what this webinar is all about, is kind of sharing these stories, these strategies, so that everyone kind of has a new jumping off point, a new way of thinking about Avail and how to implement this brand new feature. We will be doing some time at the very end to touch on, questions and answers. So if you do have a question, feel free to post that into the chat. There's a Q&A section of the webinar, I believe, as well. So as we're kind of talking and presenting and sharing, feel free to post your questions. At the very end, we'll kind of recap, we'll go through and make sure that we kind of address as much as we can towards the end. And then we'll have some kind of last announcements at the end as well around Avail. All right, so before we kind of get into things, if you haven't seen me before, my name is Clay Watson. I'm the Director of Customer Success. Rob Snyder is not with us today. He's taking some well-deserved PTO, but he is our Customer Success Manager. And so both of us kind of tag team and we run customer success and kind of bring these customers together in these webinars and share stories and success with others. So now we can kind of dive in to some of the core principles that, again, I like to repeat these things because they're just really crucial to understanding Avail and understanding the capabilities of Avail. So the first principle I like to cover is that Avail is file type agnostic. So any of these logos and icons that you see, these file types are supported through Avail and many more. So Again, we're going to be talking about some Revit functionality today, some AutoCAD Civil 3D functionality that ties into the organization palettes feature. But we support all of the other file types, anything that lives and breathes around a project. Those files are essential and important. And so our platform gives you the ability to bring those all kind of centralized into one place, into one content management solution. So if you're new to Avail, maybe you're just kind of scratching the surface with Revit content, start to think about, expanding that to other areas. What other project information, what other file information is important around projects, and how could you kind of leverage Avail and use all of this searching and tagging capabilities in the same platform? Now, the second core principle I like to talk about is another kind of agnostic principle, is that Avail is file location agnostic. So we support all these different file types, and those files can live anywhere that you'd like. We do have a hosting cloud feature of Avail, but that is an optional feature. Those files can stay on Ignite. They can stay in Google Drive. They can stay in your local directory, your network directory, OneDrive, SharePoint. They can live in these locations. Avail just sits on top of these locations and presents a nice searching interface, gives you some nice like visual browsing capabilities with this content, so that you can see some of these high-res thumbnails and previews, be able to see the content without really needing a lot of those applications that you saw before, right? Without needing a Revit or AutoCAD or Civil 3D to actually see some of these, drafting views or sheets or drawings. You can actually open up Avail and visualize them there. So that's kind of those are the two big core principles: file type agnostic and file location agnostic. All right, so now we're going to dive into understanding palettes, right? And understanding the story behind palettes and really kind of how they transitioned into organization palettes. And this is kind of around driving around, like understanding the why, right? We don't like to just throw out new features and hope they stick. We like to think about problems that they're solving, and understanding specific use cases that customers are engaging with every day, right? What are the workflows? What does that mean? What does that feedback from customers mean? And how can we create more value and add more efficiency into the product? So for a long time, if you've been with Avail for a while, uh, organizing content was always kind of at this publisher level, right? It was a way that, you could bring in and centralize all your assets. You could organize these things in your channels. You can group them, you can tag them to make them searchable. But it was always kind of, reserved for publisher kind of admin style users. So palettes was a way that uh, we could give some more capabilities to end users so that they could kind of create their own grouping of content based on what's in the library. So think about palettes and kind of what we're now referring to as personal palettes as a personal collection of content, right? It's things that they already have access to in the library, but maybe it's something that they're, commonly going back and searching for over and over. Now they have a way to actually collect that and own that for themselves. And they're also flexible, so they can be, you can add things, you can remove things from that palette, and it's not going to affect the core library. So all of those assets will remain the same in the centralized channels. But this palette can be flexible and can be shared with others as well. So if an individual created a palette and I wanted to share it with a team member who may be kind of working on some of the same project, then you could share that out. But again, it was always kind of individual to individual. And they're always kind of meant for a temporal existence. So a very temporary, creating a palette for a specific use case or a specific project, and then kind of tossing it, and you can kind of create a new one. Obviously, you can you can keep them around if you do have like a list of favorite content, but they were kind of designed initially just to be very temporary. You could create that palette. We also have the ability to bulk load that palette into Revit, which again kind of drives some really nice efficiency through the platform. So you're not, dragging and dropping, individual items. You can just bulk load the entire palette at once. But that's kind of the story behind palettes. So again, palettes were rolled out. They became very, very popular. And so as we're collecting feedback and hearing some of the customer stories on kind of like what's next with palettes, a lot of what came back was the ability to add some governance and control around palettes. They were really great for, project startups, project kickoffs, so like bringing some assets together and then, sharing them with a group. But the personal palettes were great for sharing with groups. It was really kind of meant for that kind of one-on-one individual sharing capability. So we took palettes and we added this new level of governance control and broad sharing, and also added on and tacked on the ability to bulk load organization palettes into Revit as well as AutoCAD and Civil 3D. So we're kind of expanding some of the applications that they're tied into and that they can interact with. But again, having some more control around the content within the palette, being able to curate that a little bit more, and then kind of giving publishers the ability to really kind of take what they've done in the library and make it a little bit more specific to maybe a market sector or maybe even a specific project or a client. And these are some of the examples that Caitlin and Reed will be able to kind of speak about more. Is taking kind of this curated library that they've kind of put together, making it searchable, but then kind of breaking it out and kind of delivering content in new ways, which I think is something that a lot of publishers have been wanting to do, and now Organization Palettes gives them the way to do that. All right, so I'm going to switch gears. We're going to talk, and I'm going to show you what that actually looks like in the AVAIL platform. So let me switch over. Make sure I've got this pulled up. All right, here we go. So this is the AVAIL platform. This is the home page. So each of these little individual graphics are our channels. It's the kind of how we've decided to group our content within this demo account. So this is highly customizable. Again, if you've been with AVAIL for a while, I'm sure you have your own kind of branding and style with these channel cards that can always be customized based on how you see fit. But for palettes, we've got this kind of new view and layout to palettes. So that's kind of along with the launch of Organization Palettes, we're able to kind of update the look and feel of a palette, especially around the palette card. And so now when you go to palettes, you'll see this differentiation between a personal palette with this little orange icon and then the organization palette with the blue icon. And you can see here, no longer is it, by an individual user. These are all, basically kind of created and owned at the organization. So the organization behind this account is Demo 3, but for Caitlin, it's going to say by Farnsworth. For Reed, it's going to say by Hoefer Welker. It's this organization status. It's kind of being able to elevate that palette so that everybody knows this is something that was created for the organization altogether. So looking at a palette, so every organization palette starts as a personal palette. So a kind of key point of emphasis there is that organization palettes can kind of be crowdsourced. It doesn't have to be up to one person to put these assets together. It definitely can be, but it can be a collective effort to bring different things across the library together. Again, whether it's for a specific project or a client or market sector or a specific building type, those kind of things make a lot of sense when you're building palettes. And so I'm going to go through my library. I'm going to create a new personal palette, and then I'll kind of go through the steps of actually how to promote it and elevate it and kind of what that means for other end users. So I've got a Revit family channel. I'm going to jump in here. I've got my key cards. Again, this is another kind of layer of visual navigation for the AVAIL interface. I'm going to create a casework palette. But I've got this casework, I've got 91 results here. I'm sure there's libraries that are much larger, but based on the way that I've tagged this, I'm going to choose to create a kitchen casework palette. So again, this is a collection of specific content that could be used over and over again. And this is as easy as just using that Control A, selecting all of the content, and I'm going to add this to a palette. This is a right click to add to palette. I don't have this palette that exists right now, so I'm going to create a new palette for my kitchen casework. Something we've updated now with this latest release is that when you create a palette, you get this little pop-up, which is kind of nice. So you can actually kind of see that palette right away once you've created it, which is great to be able to kind of jump right into the palette. So here's the personal palette at this level. Again, it's going to be, this is mine, this is my own. If I was an end user, it would still be my own, and I can share that with others. We've actually updated some of the permissions control, the granularity around your permissions control, even at the personal palette level. And so now, if I was going to share this with Rob, who's not here today, but I'm going to add him to the palette, I can choose to give Rob view or edit permissions. And so I'm going to say he's got edit permissions. We're going to work on this palette together. If he wants to add things down the line, he can. But we're going to see how that's going to change once I promote this, because these permissions can change if you wish, once you promote the palette to an organization level. So it's me and Rob. And I'm going to pull in Randall as well. I'm going to add him to the palette. So now we got 3 people on this palette. We're all going to be edit permissions, working on that palette together. Again, this is still at the personal level. I'm going to close out of this window and head back to AVAIL. Oops. There we go. You're going to see here, once I go to my personal palettes, I have got my kitchen casework. So this is a good thing to point out, is that when you first create this palette, you do have a way to kind of customize this grid layout to the palette. You can right click and open the palette details, and it's going to give you this little refresh button. And so this is something that you can just click, and AVAIL is going to do this for you. And it's going to grab the thumbnails of the content within the palette, and it's going to spin up and show you these the kind of mini thumbnails in this grid layout. So you can do that, and let AVAIL kind of take that customization for you, or you can actually go into the palette. And if I wanted to change this layout, maybe I wanted to show some more of the countertops and shelving that exists on this palette, I'm going to pick some items kind of randomly. Make sure I have 6. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say generate card from selection. And so now I've got this nice custom card. It's going to show some more of the content within that palette. So it's a little bit clearer representation of what all is in that palette. I cancel that. All right. So, and so then at the publisher level, so normally, end users can still create this palette. They can customize their card, all of those things. But if you're a publisher, you're going to have this nice blue button that'll appear for the palette details, and it's going to give you the option to promote that palette. And so when you click promote, it's going to give you this dialog, and it's basically going to tell you that, if this was even, I created this palette, so it kind of makes sense that it's going to stick with me. But if Rob had created this, or if Randall had created this, and they were just a consumer, right, and they were pulling these things together, and they were working on this palette, and then they shared it with me. I'm the publisher. And they said, Clay, we're ready. Take a look at this. It's ready, going to be promoted. And so I'm going to go in here. I'm going to promote it. So what that means is that if Rob had created this originally, and now that I'm promoting it, that ownership of the palette transfers to me as the publisher. So again, it goes back to that governance. It goes to that option of kind of curation before you broadly share it to groups and teams, or even everyone on your plan. But you're going to have this dialogue that's going to pop up. It's going to say, do you want to keep those existing shared users? Do you want to keep Rob and Randall on this palette? And I should say, no, they're going to get wiped out, and I'll kind of reshare this with a group and that they may be a part of, and they can still have access to it down the line. But for right now, this is going to be mine. I'm going to take a look at this. I'm going to curate this, maybe add to it, maybe delete it. Maybe if there's some things that need to get updated, those kind of things can happen. It's at the organization level, but it still hasn't been shared. So you can see here, those edit shared users, it's just me. Rob and Randall have been removed. And now, once I think it's ready, once I've kind of curated some of this content, I'm going to go to edit shared users. And now I can actually show and share with groups. So one thing in particular, if you've got everyone in your plan that's going to be there by default, you can do that. If I wanted to add, additional groups, maybe a DT group, that you wanted to, again, you can give them view or edit permissions for this entire group of users. But this is the broad sharing aspect. This is something that's not available in that personal palette level, is being able to share it and broadcast it to entire groups and teams that exist in AVAIL. So you can still add individuals to your palette, but you've got this new option to now All right, let me get this out to everyone or a specific group and team within our account. All right, so that's gonna send out that access, and so now anyone who goes to that palettes page, if they go to organization palettes, you're gonna see this kitchen casework palette. It's gonna be there available for everyone. When it comes to kind of Revit and AutoCAD, so both of our add-ins have been recently updated. So if I go over here and let me refresh. You've got a new layout to Project Navigator. So if you don't have the latest release, it doesn't look like this. Go ahead and check it out. It's available now in the downloads portal. You still have this Project Navigator interface where you can search and filter your project. We've kind of moved palettes. It used to be a little orange icon, but we've moved it over here so that we can now give you these options between loading personal palettes, bulk loading personal palettes, and or an organization palette. So in this case, I've got this casework that I can click here. I can select it. I can select multiple if I wish, but this is going to be an option for both AutoCAD and Civil 3D. When you open up those add-ins, you're going to have this new palette tab, and you can switch between the two to load content for Revit or the other applications. You also have the option to pop out the palette. So if I was in Revit, go back here. You do have this new option to actually click on this open, and that's going to give you a little pop-out that will display the palette. So it's a great way to kind of have, this side by side, right, with what you're wanting to load. If you wanted to make sure to confirm what you're going to be loading, what all is included, how many items are included in this loading process. It's a great way to kind of pop that open. And then we've also added the ability to actually pop out the palette and have it register in this loading tray. So let me move these things out of the way a little bit. So because I have got this kitchen casework palette opened in its own window, it's going to give me this option to load it right here from the Revit add-in interface. All right, fantastic. So that covers kind of the full how-to overview, right, of how to create and promote those palettes and promote them to the organization level. So what we'll do now is we're going to switch gears. We're going to switch over to our, go back here. Go back to our guest host introductions. And so now we're going to switch gears. So now it gets to kind of the meat of the webinar, which in my opinion. So Caitlin Duria is from Farnsworth Group. Again, they're kind of brand new with AVAIL. They started earlier this year, but I'm going to kind of let Caitlin kind of talk about their story with AVAIL so far, how they've kind of structured their channels, which is always kind of a great kind of behind the scenes look at how people are thinking about organizing content, and then also talk about how they're implementing these organization palettes into their workflows, using them for specific clients or specific market sectors, those kind of things that are really, really useful and important use cases around this feature. Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi. So Farnsworth, we are a full service AE firm. We currently have over 650 employees across 24 different offices. We do work on a wide variety of clients and markets, from small and local governments to some of the nation's most recognized brands. So our disciplines do cover nearly every facet of the built environment. So we are about just over a month in on our full company-wide rollout. So we're still observing how end users are finding content and how we need to adjust things. So our focus groups that we work on are the Revit and CAD users currently. So right now we have 8 Revit discipline groups using AVAIL, and then we will have 4 CAD disciplines coming in the future. So for the main channels, so they are organized by discipline and associated task. So we have the disciplines going to have currently the Revit content. Then we do have a details channel, so that houses all the standard details. We have templates, so our templates are central files, so projects are started from within there. And we have detail items, so it's again kind of based on the task that you're doing, being able to filter those channels down to those specific needs. Originally, we were looking at just doing kind of one color based on the software, but everything just blended together. So We ended up going with different colors based on the disciplines. So I was fortunate we were able to get Logan, amazing person in our marketing team, made these custom channels for us. We're also, because there is lots of channels for the groups, we are using the channel groups. So if you go to the next slide, so we are color coding those again based on the discipline. So the structure is green, so this keeps everything together. The good thing with the channel groups, you can search at the channel group level, and that is going to filter that search to just those that are in this section. So again, keeps those relevant things that you're looking for based on your needs. And then the next slide, so channel filters. So again, with all of our different disciplines, not everybody searches for content the same. There might be tags that are more relevant to some disciplines than other. So that was one of the big things with the AVAIL that we liked, was that customization at the channel level. So another thing that worked well with our transition was just how we had our folder structure set up. So a lot of our subfolders where our content is stored came across as those keywords. So like you see in the structural, those light gauge, steel, you can use those filters to, if you're just browsing for content, more quickly see, those things that you're needing. So for palettes, so there's kind of two use cases we've talked about on the personal side. So details has always been a struggle with us, bridging the gap between those Revit and non-Revit users. So we pushed for those non-Revit users that they can now use AVAIL. They can search through the library, make a palette based on the project that they're working on. So just include all the details that they deem need to be in the project, share it with the Revit user. The click of one button, they now bring all those detail into the project. So when we first showed this, that definitely had a lot of good positive comments from people that they were excited to use this feature. And then we've promoted using it as kind of like a favorites section. So again, not saving stuff locally guarantees you're going to have the latest stuff. So this one's more of a selective loading. So like you showed, popping up the palette and just loading individual things. So again, have whatever you want, but sometimes we change families, so just make sure that you do have that latest content. Then organization palette. So the ones we are currently using are title blocks. So previous experience we had with our other content management system, we saw people were searching for title blocks and couldn't ever find it just based on whatever search word they were looking for in that. So there is filters in AVAIL that can help you quickly get to those, but we felt it's one of those more infrequent things that you're not typically getting title blocks. So our central files are cartooned out with the standard 24 by 36 sheet. So the only time you really need one is if it's a larger size. So then we do have, as you see, there's package names. So we do have separate title blocks that are text-based for projects that have like multiple packages. So just separating them to ensure that they are pulling the proper title block and not, wasting effort changing things when they're not supposed to. Then things that we are looking for the organization palettes would be clients. So we do have a lot of different clients that do have specific standards. So those can be title blocks, families, even just standards that we need to follow. So being able to put those in there, again, either selective or full loading, depending what's in the project. Client materials as well. So we know renderings are kind of standard now on projects. So most of the time they have their set materials they have for their branding, just click of a button, be able to bring those into your project, not having to open other projects and bring that stuff in. And then market sectors. So we do have a wide range of markets that we do as well. So again, we don't want to have a specific market sector template for each one. With all of our disciplines, that can get very complicated and unmanageable with those. So we think we can use these to be able to put that collection of stuff to bring in the stuff that's needed. So, healthcare, there's typically base families that we're using. There might be standard details and things like that. So being able to just add those to the base template once the project starts will, make that process a lot easier and less management on our end on the template side. Most of these are geared more on the architectural side, so we are looking at ways MEP and our structural disciplines can benefit. Something else we're looking at possibly is based on construction type. So like structural, we do a lot of prefab buildings. So again, there's that families and details that are using for those. So that's something else we're going to be looking into.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, those are great use cases and examples. And again, Caitlin, they're early on, so you're having a couple of organization palettes is great. And then kind of thinking about what's next, right? How can they serve other teams, branching this out, and kind of building these and curating these to get kind of have that kind of broad sharing capabilities as well, which is great. Thank you, Caitlin. All right, great. Now we're going to turn it over to Reed Weinstock at Hoefer Welker to talk about their story and their implementation of organization palettes. Take it away, Reed.
Move this out of the way. So just a quick breakdown. We'll do a kind of a backstory on our transition to AVAIL and get into our strategy for content organization and ultimately project setup with palettes. I think for a lot of people who have recently switched to AVAIL, a lot of people were on Unify, and if you don't know, it got bought out by Autodesk, and it just didn't really transition very well, and ultimately Unify just kind of degraded in its quality, in my opinion. So about a year ago, we kind of talked internally and said, hey, like, is it worth revisiting some of the other solutions out there that compete with Unify? And ultimately, AVAIL was the clear choice. And it just really aligned with the direction that we were already going in. We've been wanting to go into a more additive workflow with our company. So Hoefer Welker is about 200 people. We do architecture, interiors, engineering, and medical equipment procurement. And then the market sectors that we work in are civics, a lot of like police station, fire stations, government work. We do multifamily. We do general commercial. We do a lot of healthcare. Healthcare is probably one of our biggest ones. And then we have some other market sectors we're trying to start up too. And they tend to be more one-off projects. We don't really do a lot of prototypical. So there's kind of this big push to really get all of our studios and market sectors aligned from a standard standpoint to whether it's how we document or what our deliverables are. So that way we're not, operating as, 10 different firms. It's just one firm at the end of the day, regardless of where we're located. So we switched to AVAIL earlier this year, and we just rolled it out a couple weeks ago. And so far it's been great. Everyone's really excited about it. And the strategy that we kind of went with for the content organization is we just noticed that there was a kind of a common trend that everyone else was doing, and it was utilizing the channels as much as possible. We kind of just copied what the channel image, the images that everyone else is doing. We figured if other people like it, why it should work for us too. We like the channel groups because we have a ton of channels, and we tailor the channel groups kind of around the discipline. So like if you're an architect or interiors, you kind of live in that architecture or interiors channel group, and you don't have to like go outside of that too. So it has all like the standard family templates and all the the generic kind of adjacent content that you might need for that discipline. So you don't have to go out into electrical if you want to find a lighting fixture. Like they have their own lighting fixture families that they can reference. And then when it comes to like the actual organization of the channels, we kind of had two options available because we wanted to keep it as consistent as possible from a management standpoint, but also just a user experience. The first option we have is we utilize the key cards, and mainly for the channels that have like a very diverse set of content. So like this channel is our standard details for our architectural teams. We have casework details, finished details, all these different types. And then from there, we get into the actual content itself. So this is another channel, our walls channel. And up at the top, we try to utilize the banner as much as possible for organizing the different typologies. So we have different partition types. So we have, there's furring partitions, masonry, wood partition, those types of typologies. And then from there, there might be attributes associated with those individual pieces of content. So like you may choose a furring partition, and that filters down that list of 100 different partitions, and then you get to see the different attributes, and it aligns directly with the syntax that we use with how we call out or name our different partition types. So you can see like there's a C21, C22, like those all have individual meanings, and those attributes are tied directly into the key values below. So you can we kind of thought of it as kind of like when you go into Amazon, you're looking for like a shoe, you can choose like a running shoe, and then you can choose the brand, and then you can choose the size and the color, and that list just kind of gets whittled down further and further. Eventually, you just have one or two different pieces of content, and people really seem to like it compared to Unify, where you kind of had to know where everything was, or you didn't. You kind of had to know what the tags were, and even as an administrator, as the person who put it together, even I found it kind of difficult. So Avail has just been a no-brainer for us at the end of the day. Um, and then how we store the content on the back end, we've kind of dubbed it into like two different kind of buckets there. The first one is what I call loose content. So these are things like individual RFA files, mostly the component families. So they could be light fixtures, medical equipment, plumbing fixtures, a door family. And on the opposite end, we have container files. This is something we've been wanting to do for a long time, and it just was really hard to do with Unify, just because it just didn't complement the workflow and made it too complicated. And this is for things like that you can't really save out. It's like system families, walls, ceiling, stairs, drafting views, typical sheets and schedules, but also like prototypical layouts. So having like typical rooms, we can store in that container file, and that's not something we've been able to do previously. And so everything kind of starts out in the loose content, and then it gets eventually transferred over into that container file. So eventually we'll just have like a couple discipline files that are container files that eventually just kind of have everything in them, almost like a kitchen sink, and then they get harvested out. And it's just easier from a management standpoint. And then like utilizing the organizational palettes for project setup. We've been trying to move towards a more streamlined workflow. And I think for a lot of BIM managers out there, there's the challenge of, how you template your projects. You have a healthcare template, do you have a multifamily template, do you have a client specific template? And it kind of just turns into this kind of like choose your own character type thing. And I kind of put up the Mario Kart reference. But it's just really hard to manage. And then the other thing that we have found is that anytime we push out new standards that are firm wide that affect every team, it takes about a good year and a half to 2 years for everyone to actually touch that. So like you may have staff that are, on one project for 1 or 2 years at a time, and that's all they know. And then when it's time to work on the next project, they don't remember all the standards that have been pushed out. So we were trying to find a way that teams could get access to standards sooner than later. And ultimately, what we kind of decided upon was having more of an additive workflow. We used to have a subtractive. We found that the subtractive workflow just doesn't align with how our business runs and how the type of projects that we do. So we're slowly moving towards an additive workflow, just moving things out of our current template into Avail as palettes. And we looked at a couple different methods out there because there's different ways of going about the additive workflow. And one of the things that we kind of looked at was like the auto industry. If you go to like the Ford website and you're looking for an F-150 truck, there's like 20 different types of F-150s. I was actually surprised. I'm not a car guy, and it kind of blew me away. But they all kind of have a few things in common at the end of the day, and they have the same chassis. And then from there's a couple different color options you can choose from. And then you can get really granular with what you want to choose with all the bells and whistles. Like you can get the Bose speakers, you can get like the 360 cameras, you can get leather seats, like all these little like sprinkles that you can kind of add on top. And what we've done is we've kind of dubbed it as like this CBT method, like chassis body trim. So like the F-150, they're all the same model. At the end of the day, it's the F-150. And how that aligns with like Revit is, you may have a template that you start with that just has bare minimum. It might have settings, line styles, text types, things that would really be unlikely to change at the end of the day. And like, or would only be like, it'd be very rare for it to change. And then from there, you get into the chassis. So this is like the discipline. So this could be like 90% of what you might use on a discipline when you start a new project. For architecture, that might be your general information sheet with your symbols and general notes. It could be your partition legends, your sheet index, a door schedule, things that just get used on just about every single project or are going to be needed, right away when you set up a project. And we're still kind of, working, through the specifics of how we divide these. That it might be one palette, it might be multiple. But then you get into like the body, and that what we kind of call as the scope or task. So like you may have like finishes or an electrical one line diagram or accessibility guidelines. These are, specific scope that could be unique to a project, or a specific task. So like you may not need to document your finishes right away, but when your project team gets to that point, that individual can load that palette in. And the nice thing about that is it doesn't put the burden on the model manager to do that. So you're not like messaging like, hey, so and so, I need you to load this content in. That designer can just go on to Avail and insert that palette in, and then they're just ready to go. And it just reduces that downtime even more. And it gives them the tools that they need while still keeping the model nice and lean. And then eventually at the very end, you get into like the trim, which is like the market or the client specific things. So like you could have a specific client that you work with that may have their own casework family standards, or you may have like a market sector that has their own or a team that has their own specific method for doing like a charrette, which we've one of the more recent ones we've made is our civic team. Like they have some predetermined room layouts already made. Healthcare, they have some unique content too, like medical equipment sheets and schedules. And then you have, the jurisdiction unique things like California, you can do Title 24 energy code sheets that just don't show up on any other type of project. And with that, you can kind of build any type of project that you want at the end of the day. So like there's all these different combination and permutations at the end of the day that you can build. And we have just found that this is probably the best workflow for us at the end of the day, and it's easier to manage. And just at a high level, what it summarizes as you have a kitchen sink kind of container file that has more or less everything in it, and then you're using Avail as a vehicle to push that into and build any project at the end of the day. So that's kind of like our strategy that we're kind of moving towards. We feel like that's the best approach for our business.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Reed. I think that's a great context, great strategy on kind of how you're utilizing, leveraging Avail and some of the palette structure, being able to break those things up, right? Being able to kind of have that easily delivered to end users so that it is easier to follow that kind of the additive approach, which is great. So yeah, thank you both to Caitlin and Reed. We're going to move into the Q&A section. And I think we've got a few that have popped in. Let me get this pulled up. First question is, how is this different than Notion? So I think Notion is maybe very different than Avail, if that was the root of the question. But if you have additional questions on just Avail in general, feel free to reach out or kind of add some more context around kind of how you're looking at the platform altogether. We had one from John. Where are the supporting configuration files located for both personal and organization palettes? Thinking in regards to a user changing PCs or changes to org palette admin. So those are all, so personal palettes and organization palettes are still tied to the users. So the personal palette is tied to that core user. And then if that palette is shared, it's tied to those other users as well. So that's going to live with that account, with that user ID that gets assigned to the palette. And then you get those granular kind of view edit permissions on the palette. So they're going to live with kind of whoever has those edit permissions and is the author of the palette. And that kind of carries over to organization too, right? So when you're that publisher, you get to transfer that ownership to yourself. If it was created by someone else, it gets transferred to you. There's no mechanism to change that ownership, but that's something that we've talked about internally as well. Is there some sort of like admin permission if you do have someone that created a bunch of organization palettes and didn't give anybody else edit permissions? Is there a way that an admin can kind of go in and adjust that authorship and move it to someone else? We're able to do that with channels. So if that does come about, reach out to my team, the support team or customer success team, and we can kind of help you through that. So that's a good question on how that ownership changes and how you can maintain that governance and control when people change roles or leave the organization. Those kind of things will happen. So. Which version supports the publisher permissions, or not the publisher permissions, but the personal palette permissions? So the latest version of the desktop is 5.3.2. So if you get the AVAIL Desktop 5.3.2, you'll be able to create those personal palettes, and then you'll have that. At the personal level, you'll still have that view edit granular permission control there. Question from Andrew. If you go down one path of organizing content and find it doesn't work for users, how easy and hard is it to pivot and reorganize? That's a great question. I mean, Kaylin and Reed, you can kind of talk about if you did go back and forth between different paths of organizing content in this kind of initial rollout period, or kind of how you were thinking about that during those stages. But I think in general, I mean, it does take some strategy and some timing, right, as you're kind of rolling these things out. But again, it is something that can be done. It's what other firms have done from time to time. It's sometimes helpful every, few years, right? As, maybe the content is changing and some of the functionality in Avail is changing to kind of give a refresh of the Avail channels and different ways that you can organize things. So that could be definitely, it's something that's been on my mind for a future webinar is understanding that process. Is if you've been using Avail for a number of years and you're kind of wanting a refresh, how do you even go about doing that? It's a great question. But Reed and Kaylin, do you have anything that, as far as your own experience on kind of like differentiating these paths and understanding what's the best fit and how to go about kind of changing that?
Yeah, we found that if where you store your content, you organize it the same way you do your channels. So like if content's going to a channel, like call that folder that channel. Because what we tried previously was like we started on our MEP side with transferring that content over to Avail. We just did it by model category, and we
Mm.
found very quickly that that wasn't the direction that we wanted to go in. So like it was very difficult. Like we had to like count and compare, like, oh, is this one going to this one, this new location? So like make it match the channels, and that'll make it a lot easier. But in terms of like if you want to restructure the channels, there were definitely a couple times that we tried different things, and it's pretty easy. Like the tag editor
Hmm.
makes it's just a copy and paste, and you just just re-upload at the end of the
Yep.
day. So it's not a huge effort if you want to like completely change things or branch things out even more. It's just adding things to another channel and moving them.
Yeah.
There was a few we kind of moved channels around, so we use the filters a lot. So if it was like the detail items, so being able to segregate that content and just say move to this channel and remove from this one. So
Right.
that made those changes a little bit easier.
Yeah, you do have the option to, copy content from one channel to another. So if you're creating something new with some new graphics or maybe a new structure, and you didn't want to, mess around with what people are currently accessing, you do have a way to kind of create something. It's just for your creation and your curation. You can copy that content over. You can bring in some of that the existing tag structure with some of the tools and functionality for publishers. And then you can kind of go about restructuring it. And then at that point, it's just like, flipping that switch between how that old channel is being shared and how that new channel gets shared. And you can do that, at the end, wrap up at the end of the day, you can switch that, how channels are shared. Suddenly that old channel goes away and this new channel appears, kind of give users a new interface. So that definitely can be done. There's a lot of publisher tools to like export the metadata, and you can kind of customize it and change it and then re-import it like Reed was talking about. And that can kind of, give you a really kind of easy, a little more efficient way to kind of make a bunch of changes across the channel if you'd like. And then even like changing some of the channel graphics are very easy to upload. That's just a quick kind of drag and drop to update a channel card. And then the key card structure as well. So we've got a key card editor. So if you do have some of these like additional graphical cards as people are clicking into channels, those can be reorganized very easily. You can upload graphics kind of very easily, and you can kind of change that if it's not working for your teams. Great. All right. Last question so far. Question from Bonnie. It kind of goes back to some of that authorship of a palette or an organization palette. In this case, when someone leaves the office, does it transfer to someone else? It doesn't automatically transfer. So again, it does stick with that user on who that publisher who promoted it. But again, if you do run into that situation where you need to transfer that ownership, reach out to my team and we can kind of help make those updates for you. But again, we've kind of talked about ways that admins being able to see and control some of these organization palettes and you know make these updates when they come about, and you don't have to reach out to us. So all those things are being discussed as we speak. Excellent. All right. Those are the last question that I saw come in. To wrap up, we're still going to leave the Q&A portion open. Feel free to drop in a question if it comes to mind. I'm going to switch over and actually go through some last announcements. Just get my screen shared back up. And all right, cool. All right, so thinking about AVAIL, we've kind of been on a road tour as of late. We actually hosted a couple of different one-day Confluence events earlier this year in Seattle, and then most recently last week in Chicago, which were great. Next stops are going to be our AIA San Diego. So we do have an AVAIL Bourbon Club at AIA this year. No booth that is going to be set up, but we're kind of doing this social event. So if you are attending, if you know someone in the firm that's attending, feel free to kind of share this information. It's going to be available on our webpage, so you can always access it there. But and we'll be sending out some additional communication, right? Kind of giving you all ways to kind of register and sign up. But all are invited. So feel free to stop by and join us for that Bourbon Club at AI San Diego. We'll also be attending AEC Innovate in June. So kind of back to back on that AIA event. And then we'll actually have a booth at AEC Innovate, booth 704. So feel free, again, if you're there, if a team member is there, or they want to stop by and meet a couple of our folks from AVAIL, feel free to do so. It's always great to kind of meet people in person, answer questions, all those kind of things at these events. And then looking ahead at the next webinar next week, we talked a little bit about this today around some of the change management, moving from different softwares and adopting AVAIL and implementing AVAIL. But we're going to do some more, kind of do like a more focused, centralized topic on understanding successful technology adoption. So part of that story is AVAIL, but I think overall, we've got a couple of customers that will be joining us at the end of the month, at end of June. They're just going to talk about their transition. So they've been with AVAIL for about a year now, and talked about that kind of full year rollout, how that adoption has looked, what kind of strategies they've used to make that a successful adoption at the firm. Because they're both cases where it's a changing software, you're moving things around for people, and shifting gears and understanding what that looks like at the firm level and at the scale. So that'll be a really great webinar at the end of June. Also wanted to touch on one other thing. We just launched a brand new survey. So if you saw anything last year, we released this tech stack survey, which was really, really great. Provides some awesome insight in the technology or kind of what that technology stack looks like across the industry, right? So we got some really awesome results. We had a couple of webinars and spoke about this at our Confluence event last fall, but we're doing a new initiative around BPM content. So we've got this new survey that's out. We'd love to get your feedback. Again, we're going to be sending some additional communication out to everyone who attended today, and then other customers as well. We want to kind of understand how BPM content can improve, right, around the quality, usability, and availability of this digital content. We know that there's a lot of challenges and struggles with this content, and we want to kind of better understand that a little bit more. So for a long time, we've had this AVAIL Select initiative, which is a way that we host an AVAIL Select channel in our AVAIL Marketplace, which is manufacturer content. So it's a way to kind of source that and collect it and centralize it in a way through AVAIL. So we're wanting to kind of get a handle on what does this look like at the firm level. How are you interacting with this content? What are the gaps, right, that maybe AVAIL can help fill in how this content gets delivered, the quality of the content, really most importantly, how that gets delivered to the team so that it can be more useful and more valuable overall. So we do have this survey that's out now. We've got some early kind of responses, which is great, but we want to be able to share this out and kind of get some more of that feedback. So be on the lookout for this communication. We'll be sending out ways that you can fill this out. It takes about 7 or 8 minutes to leave your feedback, and it'll help us kind of collect this data and then work on ways to provide better solutions. Awesome. Well, thank you all again. This wraps up this month's webinar. Again, thank you to Caitlin and Reed. This is the first time that I've brought on or asked like kind of brand new customers to join us, which is not an easy thing to do to talk about AVAIL kind of this early on, because there's so much to be done, right? There's so much, adoption to be had at the firm. But Caitlin and Reed had really great stories on their transition and kind of how they're thinking about content management. I thank them again for joining us and sharing those stories and strategies. And for everyone who attended, feel free to reach out if you've got questions around what we talked about today. If you want to set up some one-on-ones and talk through this with myself and Rob, or even Randall, kind of if you're interested in the roadmap, we're always open to kind of meet with customers, talk about how they're thinking about content management, challenges that they're facing, and then ultimately, how AVAIL can add more value and create more efficiencies in those workflows. So thank you all again. Appreciate you all attending. And until next time, bye-bye.